Thank you so much for attending the Print Compensation Trends webinar of 2022. This has been a long time coming. A lot of work has gone into assessing our wages and benefits from across the print industry sector. We've been operating the wage and benefits survey and report for many years, and I say we as the collective industry of the America's Printing Association network, of which I'm a part of. I'm Steve Bonoff, leading the Printing Industry Midwest. We've got Teresa Campbell, who's going to be introducing our team on the call today. But this is a collective effort from associations across North America, representing nearly 3,000 print manufacturers, nearly 5,000 total print-related organizations across North America. We come together every year, collectively bring our data to help us understand how to manage our labor and our costs most effectively. So this is a report specifically speaking about the wage and benefits that has been conducted for many, many years, and it's the most important assessment of wages in the print industries. And this year, we also brought back the sales compensation survey. And that's a report that is of incredible importance as we manage our business development strategies as our industry evolves. So we're looking very much forward to bringing this information to you today. And I'm going to invite Teresa Campbell to introduce the team and share a little bit about the logistics of today's event. I do want to also, but before I turn it over to her, I want to thank Rick Riesgraf and our partners at L.B. Carlson, who are a sponsor of both the wage and benefits report as well as sales compensation. And their support has really made this report possible. Not only do they provide financial support, they utilize their intellectual capacity to help us understand, well, what does this actually mean? Why does this matter? What are we going to do about it? So we thank their expertise and leadership for this report and to keep it alive. So thank you, Rick, and your team. And Teresa, we'll turn it over to you and get underway.
Terrific. Thanks, Steve. Certainly, workforce is our biggest long-term challenge in the industry today. So what we're looking at in these studies helps us to prepare for the future. We've pulled together experts from across the country to help talk about what they're seeing and how these reports impact our industry. Bjorn Anderson, who's the Executive Vice President and CFO from Impact, Debbie Boyd, Director of Human Resources at the John Roberts Company. I'm going to give some input on the reports that we've prepared. Trey Laverty from the Slate Group, who is the Director of Sales Development, Joe Polanco with New Direction Partners, and of course, Rick Riesgraf, who is a CPA with L.B. Carlson, is going to give us some input on the outlook in the industry. So we have a lot to cover. The details of the reports can be found online, but our discussion today will talk about the scope and the overview of the reports, how to use the reports, how these experts use them, recruitment strategy, recruitment and retention strategies, which has been the major influence on these reports this year, and how to have a plan going forward. With that said, let's get started. Our studies actually have 5 reports available for use in the industry. Of course, that sales compensation survey, which tells us that the trends in the industry are changing. Wide format has made a significant impact on how compensation happens for sales reps in our industry. And then there is the 2022 wage and benefit reports. The general report really is broken down by region. So if you're in a particular region, you can see details down to the specific area in your region, as well as 3 segments in the industry. So there is a packaging report, an implant report, and a union report. Now, if we talk a little bit about what those reports offer, Steve gave us some background at the beginning, but it is a report that really has nearly 500 companies participating, over 15,000 employees, and from coast to coast, every region has contributed to this report. There's over 200 positions in 16 segments. And this year we laid it out to show the 2022 or 2021 data compared to the 2022 data side by side, both by region and by company size. I know that not only are the wages important, but of course the policies for overtime and PTO and health insurance that makes all of our business is a challenge. And then of course the sales compensation report had over 100 companies with best in class sales practices related to compensation and incentive tools for maximizing sales goals. Our industry, our reports really show that 51% of the participants are from the general commercial print industry. So that's a big deal when you're looking at the data. When we look at how many in the industry are union-based, we have 7% participating that actually are union shops today, and that's a change from the past as well. Joe, you want to add a little bit to kind of the historic data here?
I'd be glad to, Teresa. Good morning. Again, the report has its roots back in the 50s and has really migrated over the years dramatically. And it's now become probably the most comprehensive report that the affiliated organizations across the United States have done in years. The participation is maintained at the 400 and 500 companies for the last 5 to 6 years. And again, over the years, we've modified reporting to make sure that we reflect the changes in, for example, like Teresa said, wide format, reflect those areas. And again, one thing that I like to remind everyone is if you see areas of compensation that we're overlooking, please contact your local affiliated manager and provide that feedback, because again, that's something that we try to track, but we can overlook certain areas. The big thing, and Teresa, let's go ahead and talk about the survey itself. Excuse me, I've got a phone on I got to get rid of here. I apologize.
Oh, okay. That's okay.
Is the areas that this is the heart of the survey. And again, like Teresa said, there's 200 different, we'll call them jobs or job descriptions in there. And it varies from basically the hand bindery all the way to executive areas. All formatted fairly similar as we see here. But what's important, and we're not showing it in this report here, is that we do the analysis by size of company as well as by region, because you will see very distinctive compensation trends differently in the Western United States, which tends to be predominantly smaller printing companies, versus the central part of the United States, which tends to be predominantly larger companies. And you'll see those trends as far as region as well as by size. This year, we added a because I think COVID brought this about, but we brought a comparative report from 21 versus 22. Now, again, those are, for example, 21's report is basically 2020 data. 22 data is predominantly 22. It's half and half as far as when we do the survey in the summer. But to just give you an idea of the point, the survey is done during the summer, reporting wages, salaries at that point in time. And as we touch on later on, we do ask some questions going forward from that period of time. What does the next 6 to 12 months look like for wages or other compensation and benefits? Critical, over the years, we realized that you just can't have a high, low, and an average. It just doesn't make sense with the complexity of data. So we really have gone through a much broader spectrum of analysis. And we really, as that we've highlighted here, we have two real, we'll call them mean points, central tendencies that report. One is an average. That is a numerical average of all the companies, positions participating. So for example, let's take a look at 2022. We have all participants. There was 36 companies participating for this position, which was a 38 to 42 inch 4 to 5 color press operator. This is the lead press operator. There was 67 employees reporting, and you see a mathematical average. In this case, you also saw a median, which is that midpoint of $27. This is critical when you analyze. This tells me that this distribution of data was pretty good, that the low $17 to the high of 40 was fairly well distributed statistically. Very, very critical when you start analyzing data and you're looking at your employee data and what have you versus what's going on in the marketplace. If you look it down, and you'll see it again in the 150 plus employees, a much smaller subset, you see an average that varies differently from the median. And again, that's part of the reasoning. We're showing that data, but also reflects that we had a relatively small number of participants, and that's going to, again, that kind of data falls out. We added several years ago a P90. That basically represents at what point there was 90% and less employees being surveyed. That was the highest, we'll call it 90th percentile being reported. And it's critical because in some positions we have some true outliers. If you take a look at, for example, 2675 employees and 38 to 42, 4 or 5 color press operator, you see a P90 of 3143. And then you see a 3701. That's a big difference. That's almost a 20% difference in compensation. And again, it skews the data mathematically, but it gives you, again, a much more important point to look at and say, hey, where do the majority of people lie in the range of 3143 was reports at 90th percentile, all the way down to that low side of 1870. The data, like everything else, is data. It just gives you a point to look at to help you analyze. We strongly recommend that you look at other local regional information, look and talk to your local association to get additional data, because again, this information is a summary of a lot of sources, a lot of regions, and it's just, again, a tool you can use to help you give you the appropriate feedback. Teresa, I think I've covered that fairly well. If you want to cover the benefit side of it, I thought it was interesting what we had done this year.
Definitely. It really makes a difference. So I'm going to point out, Joe, before we move on from this slide, that you're looking at the 2021 on top and the 2022 on the bottom. They're side by side throughout the reports this year, so you can go all the way across with the ruler to use them. But some might say, how is it here if we look at the middle-sized companies that last year it was 2662 as a median, and this year it's 2450, and over here at the high end 37, and now it's 36. So I would point out that keep in mind, it is not the same participants every year. It is a variety of participants, and that helps us kind of keep it leveled, not just one or group of companies that are driving that data. Joe, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
No, that's a good point, Teresa. We end up every year we do this, we have about a 20 to 30% rollover. That means we have companies that didn't participate this year, but may participate the year after. And it's interesting that about 1/3 of 40% of all the participating companies participate every year, like clockwork. And again, we thank you for that because that's very important. So you are going to have some roll off and rollover. What I found over the years that when you start looking at the all participants area, rather than the smaller subsets, whether it's regional or employee, you'll start seeing some truer numbers, because then we start getting into more statistically validated, especially when you get into certain positions like customer service, project management, where you're talking hundreds of employees. You see some very good data there. It doesn't change a whole heck of a lot because, again, you have a good set of numbers. But I think there is that error, for lack of a better word, error that can occur when you start looking at these smaller subsets, but more the reason for participation on a regular basis, so that, again, you have a base point to look at every year, see what's really changing. And in some cases, with copies of confidentiality, we cannot allow that data to be shared amongst participants. And if we have less than 4 companies participating in an area, we don't report that data, because, again, it becomes very apparent who that might be.
Correct. So we spend a lot of time making sure that these numbers don't get skewed. And our goal is to help you understand the sampling of participants that participated, and that those change every year, which is valuable. So it's not the same subset from year to year. Now, the big driver in this year's analysis really lies on that recruitment and retention, and we're going to get into that. But before we do, I'm going to ask Debbie if she has any comments from the HR side about the wage survey elements. I know that you use this every day, and tell us about that.
Absolutely. I'd like to start off by saying, first of all, thank you very much for putting this together. This is a valuable tool for me to use every year. And it's interesting, it's getting easier and easier to report the data each year. So whatever you guys are doing, it's for an employer, it's easy to report that data. But I absolutely do. I look at this on a regular basis, and we're always going back to this to see what our industry is doing. Majority of the people that we are hiring hopefully have that experience in the printing industry. So we want to be comparable to what our competitors are paying as well. So this has been a valuable tool, and I'm really pleased that you guys provide this year after year.
Excellent. Thank you, Debbie. Let's get into the nitty and gritty of the recruitment and retention part of it. So I put this slide in there comparing it not only by or by region, but the next slide is by company size. And that's significant. I want to point out this third line here that says companies adding employee incentives as a retention strategy. And the total overall, 50% of our companies nationwide are added incentives this year. But as you go across here, look at the differences in the areas of the country. And there's a whole lot here in means of what type of incentives they're offering, bonuses versus special lunches. But you can see how your area compares to other areas in the country. And then, let's get you out of the way here. If we look here by company size, it's a lot different. So here, companies adding employee incentives as a retention strategy, all participants was 50%. But when you look at the smaller companies and going up, companies that have more employees, 75% of them added employee incentives. That's important for our members across the board to recognize if you're a company with less than 25 employees, what you're competing against across the board. And then the same thing with bonuses or PTO, and how do you add up or stack up? So I'm going to leave it here for a moment and ask the panelists to comment on their thoughts about incentives.
Teresa, it's Joe. One thing that I found very interesting about this, which reflects a lot of discussion that you read about in a variety of business journals, as well as within industry presentations, and you talk to different folks like I do across the United States of owners and what have you, was how the industry is reflected to adjusting wages for existing staff. Wage compressions have been a big issue across the U.S., especially here in California, where we have a minimum wage of $15 an hour across the state. So when you raise that minimum for a new hire or for a new position that's now was paid at $12 an hour is now going to 15, it's going to, people that were making more money want to keep that, for lack of a better word, this change a value. If I was being paid $15 an hour and I've been here for 2 years and now someone's making the same and just walked in the door, there's a problem. And you can see here, the industry was very cognizant of that. We saw that again, the larger the companies, the more they were aware of that, and which is again, pretty typical because smaller businesses just don't have the latitude sometimes because they are sort of mom and pop shops, so to speak, that's very closely held family businesses, and they operate at a different world, for lack of a better point. But again, I found that very interesting as far as information reflecting what's going on in the industry and the necessity for firms to be able to look at that because your competition's doing it. As Debbie mentioned earlier, you've got to be looking at what's going on in the marketplace. So I found that very fascinating.
I have to agree with you. I think the wages are the first thing that we had to look at to make sure that we were competitive and people were retaining our employees. But the other interesting factor I found is that work-life balance. It was really important for that vacation or that extra days off, or maybe longer days and more days off. So 410s has been really popular for us. So that work-life balance seems to be right up there with wages, is what we're experiencing here.
Trey, will you talk a little bit about the sales analysis part of it? How does it work for your sales staff?
So I think the one thing is where we've kind of looked at different things from retention and recruitment. I think you almost have, it's really easy to go recruitment first and retention, right? But I think it's by a little bit backwards. I think if you can create a great retention program, then that gets spread out and people talk and we create a brand, things like that. And that makes it a lot easier to recruit based on that as well. And I think from the sales strategy, we've kind of changed it to, we're not really approaching bringing in recruiting new sales reps of just, hey, do you want to be a printer? And I think we use that a lot, just like, hey, go out and print some stuff and sell print. That's not sexy. That's not exciting to the new age, thing like that. So I think we have to reevaluate how we look at it. So how we approach it is we're going more after the creatives, the advertising degree, the marketing degree. And so there are people that are interested in the graphic art side of it and say, hey, you get to be an opportunity to be an extension of marketing teams all over the country and get to have your passion inside of that. And that's a lot more attractive to it as well. And then it's also bringing them in here and help them kind of be leaders to where on our retention, even our production staff is, don't just send a job down through the shop, go down there and explain what this job's about. Explain what this job means and what it's going to do for our customers, things like that. And then you get more buy-in, and it feels like everybody's they're on a team together and they're on a mission to help our customers out. So that gives them just a little bit more emotional buy-in as well, all the way through. So that's really been a big part of our growth, and it's made it a lot more fun as well.
Excellent. I'm going to move to this next slide. Just talk a little bit about using the reports where we mentioned current employees versus new employees, incentives to those to retain them versus those to recruit them. So we're kind of going through those details right here. I want to put this topic up and start with recruitment and really just talk about trends and the culture in it. Rick, I know that you, from a financial CPA standpoint, see some differences in the trends than others might. What are your thoughts there? You're muted.
Sorry about that. A couple of things we're seeing as it specifically relates to recruitment is, you have it on here. I'm sure some of the panelists are going to talk about culture, but we've never seen culture take such a front standing in discussions in the operating plans and the strategic plans of our clients right now. It's a main focus. It's a lot of attention's getting put into building your internal culture, like Trey just mentioned, and so that's something we definitely see. And I don't see anybody or see a bullet point about it, but we've also, I'd be interested in seeing if any of the panelists have run into this, where we've had a couple of our larger clients add an HR position 100% devoted to recruiting employees. It's basically, that's what their job is, to go out and recruit. And we haven't seen that even back in the days of the worst Great Recession that we had, back in 2008, 9, 10. So it's people are very much paying attention to this, and it's coming out in a lot of different ways.
So a recruitment specialist versus hiring a general HR professional.
Right. Yeah.
Interesting.
It's interesting, Rick, you mentioned that within the last 30 days, we've hired a recruitment specialist, and all she will be doing is recruiting. We felt that with the market that we're going into, a lot of people not maybe going into the print world, we needed to really specialize on finding some talent and doing a lot of training within. So yes, we have a full-time recruitment person, which is very unusual because it's usually that HR generalist that's handling multiple things. But this position is recruiting only. So I think more and more companies are going to go that direction.
When we talk about recruitment, Buren, will you talk about your company and how you recruit and where those recruits are coming from? Because we see that there's just not enough with skilled labor from within the industry. Our companies are stealing workers from each other, and we have to go outside the industry to find those workers.
Yeah, sure. I can touch on that. I would say, first, kind of even taking a step back, we've had to kind of shift our mindset away from thinking of interviewing as like, us grilling a candidate and deciding if they're a good fit for the organization. And instead, at the very least, thinking of that as a two-way street. So I feel like, I'm in finance, but sometimes I feel like a salesperson because, my sales is, selling the vision of the company, selling why, Impact or Infinity is a great place to work, and trying to articulate, why, aside from kind of the X's and O's of the offer, why somebody might want to kind of join our team, which is different. That's changed in the last couple of years, where it felt like, for every one opening, you might have 12 candidates. Now it feels like you got to work your butt off just to get a candidate for an opening type of deal. So, and like you said, Teresa, we're in Minneapolis area, which we have a lot of people. There's a lot of companies in our industry. We have, I guess, the luxury, so to speak, of having experienced operators, but we have the challenge of, a lot of the companies in our area, we all need people. So how do we avoid, right, your gain is my loss and vice versa? And the answer is, we got to figure a way to kind of expand the pie. So some of the ways that we've been trying to do that, and, I'll mention some of these and say there's been no silver bullet, and some of them have had some success and some others, but we've been partnering with area schools, so community colleges, technical colleges. We've come up with kind of some internship programs, just figuring out a way that we can get people to get a foot in the door, hopefully, and be able to kind of add value right away, but at the very least, have a positive connection so that in a couple of years where they're exiting their program, they might think of their experience as positive and want to join us on a full-time basis. So doing some partnering with schools, technical colleges. We've also partnered with like community organizations. So whether that's a refugee community, their employment services, anything like that, that's basically looking for people where there might be a need for jobs and helping, it be a win-win where we need people, they need jobs, and trying to find a match on that point. As we talk about kind of expanding the pie, one of the challenges has been, how do you, it's a lot easier to hire somebody who's ran a press for 10 years and preferably even the exact press that you want to hire them to do. So how do you somewhat efficiently get more creative and, find somebody who's mechanically inclined, a hard worker and reliable, and get them from no experience to contributing, and up to speed on your equipment. And I'd say that's been Debbie mentioned they brought in a recruitment specialist. We just kind of graduated and we hired our first full-time HR manager here within the last year, which traditionally we've always had more of an payroll HR specialist type of role. And so part of the manager's role is putting more of a process in kind of the recruiting and retention side. And that dovetails with kind of figuring out a program for getting somebody from, hard worker, maybe, experience on equipment outside of our industry into ours. And that's kind of been a collective effort of production and HR. Because what we found is, HR, we can have all these good ideas, but if there's not buy-in kind of on the floor, they don't really go anywhere too fast. So those are some of the things that we've been kind of working on to expand the pie.
How do you guys pass that on to your managers to help build the culture that retains the employees?
I think including them as early on in the process as we can so that they're part of, well, I guess I'd answer that two ways. One, it's now no secret that finding good people that's difficult. So, our production managers understand that. And so they're not sitting around wondering why they haven't, been given 10 good candidates to pick from. So I think involving them further upstream has been important. I'll also say we've been more intentional than ever about including, ownership or executive or management levels in the recruiting and interviewing process. So kind of coming alongside our hiring managers with the idea being, it's reinforcing the idea that, hey, thank you for giving us an opportunity to tell you about impact, and that you'd be an important part of our team if it was a fit type of deal. So not sure if I answered your question super well, but I think having it be a collective collaboration between HR, management, and production kind of as far upstream as possible has been helpful for us.
Excellent. Trey, how about you? Culture is a recruitment tool today. It has to be. How do you help your company to build culture that recruits potential workers?
It's a great question. And I think with culture, it starts at the top. And I think that's your leaders is who's got to implement that and live it. It's not one of those things. We can't be just kind of put a shade over your eyes and do a bait and switch when we're saying, hey, we're a great company. And then when we're actually working together and they're not living that from day to day. So they've got to be fully invested in, like Bjorn said, they got to understand the vision, and we got to communicate that to our managers so that they can live out that vision for us as well. And culture takes a while. When we started kind of working in our culture and making that adjustment 10 years ago, it took a little while because it's something new. Not a lot of people like change. And so how do we kind of slowly do that and integrate and doing different things? And then as you're getting through there, and then once you get to that point where you've got a culture, you got another culture too, talking about from a sales standpoint, production, there's sometimes it's really easy to have a wall built up between sales and production and in different areas in your building. So how do you break down those walls so that we're all the same team? Then whenever we ran into it last year where we had some rapid growth. And so it used to be, we go from a company where you just know everybody, and then you have rapid growth and you're hiring a lot of people and you don't know everybody. And then the people that are coming on, they don't really feel like they're a part of it just yet because they're just haven't really plugged in just right. So it's a lot more apt to bounce really quickly versus giving a little bit of time. So we put together like a office Olympics through that span over 3 to 4 months. And then the goal on that was to specifically create different teams that were a mix between our administration, sales, someone off the press, and someone in binary, someone in mailing, and really mix it. And then you're able so that they were able to work together as a team and do like silly, like 1-minute challenges and things like that we just randomly did. But it became a fun place to be at. And whenever people wake up and it's like, hey, I'm going to go hang out with some great people and I'm enjoying where I'm at most of the day, then they want to work harder and they want to work for the man or woman next to them as well. So, but again, that goes back to starting with the managers and from our leadership team and understanding the vision and pushing that vision and living it so that people want to step up to that challenge.
Absolutely. There was a question in the chat to see if any of you guys are using any screening tools when you're recruiting or hiring.
If I'm honest, I would say if having somebody show up to a few interviews on time and just show up has been that's been kind of a screening tool in and of itself, trying to strike the balance between we don't want it to be too difficult to bring somebody new in, like, have 6 interviews, but also we don't want it to be too easy either, because then somebody says yes and then they don't show up to work. So we don't do any kind of, we certainly have managers ask questions and try to get kind of a sense of mechanical inclination, but we're not doing any consistent tests, so to speak, that somebody has to pass to work with us.
We will add some on Indeed. So whenever you have an Indeed job ad, they allow you to add in some tests in there. So for just different things, a lot of times we'll put on their reliability, like a reliability test. Sometimes if it's more like an administration, like Excel tests, things like that. But trying to figure out just one to see if they're interested enough, they'll actually take it, and that sometimes will narrow the pool a little bit. But then it'll also kind of show, okay, are they highly proficient and basically just showing up to work? Are they going to be reliable? Are they mechanically aptitude? You can use that, and it's free to use on your Indeed post. So that's what we'll use from time to time, but that's about it.
Debbie, how about you?
No screening on this side as well. It's a matter of just having the candidates come in, building those relationships, asking the right questions. And again, I agree with all the panelists. Getting the HR or the managers involved right from the beginning is critically important.
Excellent. Okay, so we know that the wage and benefit report and the sales compensation report offer a ton of information, but are there other sources that you're using to track non-industry compensation trends? We track LinkedIn quite a bit. We know that if you're going to try and compete with automotive, you're going to have a hard time because there are incentives there that are difficult to compete with. But when you look at shipping and receiving, wow, there are a lot of candidates looking there, and it seems that they don't feel as well connected to their organization because they're not helping in producing the product. So there's a pool of opportunity to get in the door and move through maybe from that source. What other sources do you guys use?
I can share that we work with our insurance broker on a variety of resources that they might have. When I get into some more detailed jobs that I'm looking for, but can't think of anything top of my head that pops out at me.
This is a great resource, just kind of give us a benchmark, kind of see where we're at. We're, even though we may be in one region, we're kind of in more of a rural area. So we're maybe 4 to 5 hours away. You got 5-6 hours, you got Austin, which is a completely different ball game from where we're at. So it kind of gives a little bit of a benchmark. And we don't really have any other reports. It's kind of more just through conversation, through the interviews. And we're having to bring in people in. We don't have the luxury of having a lot of other print companies in our area to pull from. So we're pulling from different industries. So it's very interesting just through conversation and seeing how much that they're making in those. And that kind of gives us kind of a different idea as well of where we kind of need to be.
Yeah, I agree with Debbie mentioned, so we would work with our broker who'd have kind of similar benchmarking reports, which sometimes aren't as helpful. Just compared to the wage and benefit survey, which is industry specific, I find that to be more helpful. Robert Half publishes, reports that are helpful, especially on the office jobs. The office side is a little bit less industry specific. So I found those or accounting to be helpful. And then, collecting the data points internally. So if somebody's, doing exit interviews and understanding if they're willing to share where they're going, what prompted them to leave, what they might be getting paid, what their new job is, that kind of stuff is all, it's kind of point by point. It's not such a big sample size, but it's helps you have a pulse on kind of the area.
So for many years, print wasn't seen as an attractive or sexy industry to work in, but really so much has changed. There are a lot of exciting things happening in the print industry, wide format and geofencing and connecting with QR codes or virtual reality opportunities. How do you let your recruits know that print is exciting? Is there tools for that? I know that Print Industries offers the Print is Everywhere campaign and talks about all the different things. Are there other tools that you see or use?
Ours has been just trying to get people in here. I think one thing is we give probably a tour, at least one tour, 1 to every 2 weeks through, college students that are in advertising or graphic design or marketing for various colleges and stuff, as well as just people in the industry from 8 different agencies and stuff. But our goal is we're an open book. We want to just get people in here because what happens is a lot of times I always ask them after we finish up a tour, and I always ask them what were you expecting? And it's always, it wasn't this. When the people think of a print shop, they think of just a small mom and pop shop and just kind of down and gringy and dirty, and but there's a perception in there, and we've all experienced that. I mean, think about when you're at a party and you mention what do you do, and you tell them you're a printer, and it's kind of okay. But it's but then you're you just want to kind of wheel back and say, no, I do some cool stuff. We really do. But there's kind of a stigma on it. So it's how do we get people in here? How do we show off some different things? And through that, every tour I give, we've got these college students that are just wanting to come. They just want to be a part of it afterwards, to where in an internship program or even just working in between classes. We've even got our wide format department. It's completely changed to where we have 4 women that have an associate's degree in graphic design that are pretty much a huge source of and working in our wide format department, and they're like just loving it because that's they get a release for their creativity and they get to be a part of it. So by changing that from just like, hey, we're just a printer, to hey, you get to be a part of this whole graphic arts and create some really neat stuff from a creativity standpoint. But if once we get people in here and they get to see it and get to be a part of it and feel the vibe of it and get to see other people, another thing that we run through is I'm very proud of our culture and all the people that work here, and we'll give a tour, and then you'll usually expect for people to say, wow, that was some really cool equipment. We've had a lot of questions at the very end say, why is everybody smiling? Why, what, we got music going on, things like that. Everybody's having a good time. Why, you don't see that in most places. And through that, it's kind of like, I want to work here. And then they go tell somebody. So we kind of create that right there, but it's getting people in here understanding what we're doing. And then that right there, people they're talking, they get that kind of word of mouth. So.
Excellent. There are two questions in the Q&A box, and one is, do any of you do drug screening? With the marijuana laws changing in every state across the country, it's impacting mechanical work like printing. Do any of you drug screen?
We do not at this point. We did up until COVID. COVID kind of put a wrench into a variety of things. We weren't able to do a lot of our testing at that point. And then when things opened up, and we've got the issues with the marijuana stuff. So, we are not back to that drug testing, and we're not sure if we're going to go back to it or not.
We're still doing drug testing. It's a topic of conversation, but we've stuck with that as a part of our pre-employment screening.
Do you also carry through with random at times, or just upon hire?
Our handbook allows for random, but that's not something that that we do. I can't think of doing it hardly ever or ever. So it's pretty much, a pre-employment thing, and unless extenuating circumstances called for something beyond that.
Okay, Slate Group, how about you?
We used to, then we, just like everybody else, we kind of pull back and haven't done drug tests in quite a while.
Okay. The second question here is, how do you get managers involved? And so they're really the ones that make your culture. And is there a secret to empowering them?
Well, I think it goes back to relationship building, and it goes back to building your team. The better your team, the better you're going to be able to, get to your goals. So I think it's up to us as a company to be able to supply those tools and those resources to our managers on how to build a good team. So it's not just about people, it's about a team approach.
So there's not just one fun ambassador. Everybody has to take that approach.
Everybody does, yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. That next bullet, will the tight labor market loosen up? If we talk a little bit about the economic part of it, Rick, what do you see from the financial side? You're muted. Yeah.
I don't know how to hit that button quicker. We had a recent Financial Executives Committee webinar not that long ago, and had a individual from the state of Minnesota that kind of spent a lot of time looking at this, looking forward into what's going to happen. And it was kind of discouraging, I guess, in one sense, that the feeling is out there that people that study demographics and the makeup of the work population are feeling that I think the labor market's going to stay tight. The demand will stay up for qualified positions, particularly skilled labor, just with the aging demographics in our population and the pent-up demand of the economy. Even in a recession, they're still saying we're going to have trouble getting labor, and so that was an eye-opener, I guess, thinking in the traditional thought process. Well, you have things contract a little bit, the labor frees up, and it resets, and they're not looking for that to happen right now. And I just don't know what others are feeling about that. But I am getting some concern coming from some of our clients regarding that going forward. So.
Joe, anything from your perspective on the merger acquisition end?
Again, like Rick, talked to a lot of different folks across the United States, and all I can say is everyone's busy, and everyone, now that we've gotten past, so to speak, the paper crisis, labor is a big issue. But I think Rick's got a good point that when you look at the macroeconomics, it doesn't bode well in the sense of the labor pool over the next 2 or 3 years. In the sense of there's going to be a lot of competition. We're dealing with a aging workforce in our industry. I forget what the median age is. It's probably somewhere up in the 45s to 50s, which is typical of manufacturing. So back to how do we recruit younger people? How do we retain them? That's what the folks have been talking about, is culture. And that's going to be probably more the focus in the future going forward. That's from my perspective.
How do you feel, all of you, this is a question for all of the panelists. You know, we have these inflationary pressures that are happening right now. There is interest rate hikes, there is government spending, and it's impacting the cost of print and impacting the cost of labor to produce print. Do you feel like the pressures are manageable? How is the inflation, how are you handling it?
This is Debbie. I think from the John Roberts standpoint, we have felt that the cost of business has gone up, our wages have gone up. Before, maybe it was more of a 2 to 3% increase, and now you're looking at closer to a 5% increase. And it is tough, because at what point do you stop, or at what point is the paper going to change? Is the market going to change? It's tough. It's really tough. And then you have to look at your staff that you have internally and make sure that you're treating those individuals as equal to the new people you're bringing on board. So it's a balance for us right now.
Yeah, I would echo that. I'd say we've definitely done larger increases, or larger, I guess, total package increases than we have traditionally in the past. So that's one way that we've been, and obviously in a skinny margin business, every dollar counts. And so we've had to be in lockstep with our pricing, you know, so if our costs go up, we've got to make up for it somehow. And so whether that means passing it along to the customer through price increases, or, you know, figuring out creative ways to, if you've only got a budget of this, you know, is there a different spot in the organization where something can come out so you can add something more in here? So it's kind of had to be a broad collaboration across, you know, from HR, finance to sales and pricing.
Yeah, the pressures are certainly real. Trying to balance that, you got to be competitive, yet you have to cover your costs, and you still have to make a profit, because why are we doing this? Why are you in business? Rick, will you talk a little bit about the impact on wages from workers being left behind and the Federal Reserve information you have?
Yeah, it's to echo what the panelists are saying, that inflation is probably front and center topic for all of our clients, all the workers, pretty much all of us, as we've experienced the 40-year high here recently. There was a recent Federal Reserve article printed out of the Dallas branch. The title of the article was "More Workers Find Their Wages Falling Even Further Behind Inflation." So what does that mean? You know, it's like everybody knows what inflation is doing and how tough it is to keep up. But I think because of some of the things that have been mentioned already, Joe mentioned the wage compression and some of the trying to keep up, trying to retain staff. Well, you're trying, but you're maybe not fully keeping up. And there is a lot of pent up issues, I think, that this article pointed to in the workforce itself. They're feeling pressure because of the inflation that they're seeing on the home front. They're feeling that they're not keeping up. There's certainly some indicators that spending is being pulled back. So maybe this is the start of some recessionary types of things because of that issue, and that issue primarily. There's other issues that impact it, but the inflation it just kind of gets people all wound up, you know, and it hits your pocketbook right away. So some data that they shared in that report, you know, inflation was roughly 4.89% in 21. It's going to be 7.8 or 8% in 22. Forecast is 6.5% or more for 23. You know, you're looking at a 3-year period of 20% increase. That's hard to manage when you're trying to also recruit new people and trying to put them at the right spot. And so they talked about that in that article, that generally, even though employers were trying to keeping up with this, they were behind the game by at least 10%. And so employees were feeling that. So that's just something to consider and keep in the back of your mind. The Wall Street Journal had an article that was also referenced in this Federal Reserve report that pointed to the pressures as well, and how the angst is building out there. And then today, I looked at Fox Business, and there's an article, inflation driving more than half of Gen Z to live with their parents. 7 in 10 adults ages 18 to 25 feel they cannot pay their bills on time. Well, you get that thought process going, that just feeds into what everybody's been talking about here. And so I do think the prediction is inflation to continue next 3 years potentially before that slows down to whatever new normal is going to be. And so these are weighing on the workforce, the current workforce, the new employees, the recruits, all that type of thing. So I'm trying to arm our clients with that information. So far be it from me to say, go out there and pay your employees more than what you think you should, but it's definitely better be something that's getting paid attention to.
There's a great question in the Q&A that says, with companies like Amazon and Twitter having significant layoffs, is this the forecast of something to come, or simply that company or industry specific? Could it loosen the tight labor market with those big companies doing layoffs?
You know, I can't say I would be accurate on this, but I'm feeling there's a sense that people are more worried about this is becoming more of a global trend than just those specific tech company issues. Even some of the manufacturers we're seeing are feeling that some of this is starting to happen right now too. So I just was on a call with a few a different board, and for the first time they're starting to talk about their sales are starting to feel off a little bit. I haven't heard that in a long time. So got to be careful of the self-fulfilling prophecy, but it is out there. It's an undercurrent of everything. We just have to see how it goes.
I'd echo that also. The macro trends don't bode well. When you look what's going on with China right now, what's happening there, that's going to have a major influence on supply chains and other issues across the world, which affects us. I think what you're seeing in the IT world was a bubble that's maybe now, you know, they overthought the growth they thought was going to be there, well, it wasn't there due to COVID. But I think it does provide maybe some opportunities for some folks to cherry pick some employees that get laid off. But again, you're back down to, in our industry, we're still looking for very technologically savvy people with certain backgrounds. And that, again, that for lack of a better word, those folks that are getting laid off may or may not fit our needs. But more importantly, we have to remember that we're now also competing against a different industry with different compensation plans, with different benefits. And the culture of our company and how we present ourselves to those prospects is critical, which again, all our folks have been talking about. Culture. Very critical today.
Kind of points to this last bullet and thinking about the employee and what their talent is and what motivates them. I've had some organizations say, now we're in the career counseling business. It's now our job to help them plan for their future and figure out what they like and what they do best. And And that's not really the business that they're in, but that's the business that you're doing. So let's start with you, Trey. What are your thoughts on being those career counselors now?
I think that's a big part of what we do. I do that even for people that have been in a career for a while. We're still counseling. I'm like, what excites you? Where do you want to go? But it's also, it's figuring out what their talent is. I think you're also hiring off like personality. I mean, you find the right personality that's going to fit into your culture and who's going to add to that culture and continue growth. Because those are the type of people that you can put them wherever, and they're going to do everything they can to learn it and grow and keep going from there as well. And trying to figure out, we ask a lot of times, like, what do you want to do? If you can do anything, what would that be? And if we can figure out what that is, then we can maybe put together a path, maybe a non-traditional path, or maybe to help get them to where what excites them. And it may be, they may be coming in for a production job because that's what's available, but their passion is, visiting with people or doing marketing. All right, let's get you here and let's start working there. And let me bring you in on some different conversations, or let me bring you in on these projects, so that way they've got some excitement in there and they've got their passions are fulfilled of what they're wanting to do. Because again, it's not all. I know we're talking about a lot of money and a lot of people were expecting money, but really at the end of the day, people, and I've seen this multiple times, and I've hired a lot of people for less amount of money if it's a great place to work. If it's a great place where they find happiness, they will take less money because they'll do it, and they usually do a better job. And if they are, then we can compensate them later for that. So.
Okay, so with that said, Buren, Debbie, do you guys offer retention bonuses if they stay a year, if they stay 2 years?
We do not offer any type of retention, but I would like to say that Trey is absolutely correct, that career planning is essential. It starts actually in the interview process with myself. I might be hiring a bindery helper, but I'm also asking those questions. What else do you want to do? Where do you see yourself going? Those questions are also asked on every review that we have with our employees as well. So that career planning is a major focus of our day-to-day jobs in not only in HR, but as the managers have those relationship conversations as well. But retention bonuses, no, we do not. We do a referral bonus, but we do not do the retention.
Buren, how about you?
We do, I guess, a version of a retention bonus in that we do profit sharing that's tiered based on length of service. So the longer you've been around, perhaps, you'd get a larger tiered profit sharing bonus. So that would be kind of a little bit of variable compensation that would be tied to, somebody who's been around longer gets more type of deal. So that'd be kind of, otherwise, we may do an ad hoc retention bonus on a case by case, but that hasn't been a consistent part of our compensation packages.
Okay, so we've had lots of companies get really frustrated because they feel like they bring someone in and then they train them, and then you have somebody else that's willing to give them a few dollars more, and then they jump ship. And how do you keep them from doing that? It's impossible. Particularly, we have one in the Dallas-Fort Worth market that will pay, whatever it takes. And it stinks because it's the Federal Reserve for our federal government, but they'll pay whatever it takes. And how do you compete with that? What do you do to keep them from jumping ship?
I think that's just a risk you got to take. It's one that goes back to the old saying, it's like, what if you don't train them? And then you don't, and they end up staying. You don't train them, and then they end up staying, But so I think it's a risk that you take. I think you go in, you train them, you bring them into the culture, and you love on them, and you try to find where do they want to be, and how do we find growth plans and things like that. And at the end of the day, sometimes it's, hey, I can make a little more money here. We've seen that a lot. We've had quite a few people that have left, and then they boomerang back because sometimes the grass isn't always greener on the other side. And the reason that they've left, they were making more money. They came back to make less money, but they did it because they're like, I enjoyed it so much more here than I did there. And so and so you've got to respect their decision too. Yeah, I mean, you don't want to burn any bridges. It's really easy to get frustrated, but you don't burn bridges. You support them and support their decision, and you want to do that in hopes that they could come back.
Yeah, I
Interesting.
would say this is where the wage and benefit surveys helps, constantly benchmarking and figuring out what is the root cause. Are we chronically kind of below benchmark in these positions? In which case, either we have to have a different niche that's keeping people around, or we need to make an adjustment. So being able to analyze, is this a odd circumstance where somebody like the company in Dallas that you mentioned is doing something crazy, in which case there's not much that you can do, or is this a symptom of kind of a greater root cause? I think one of the things that we've also tried to do is a little bit of a in a case like that, you may be hiring somebody as a 1, but giving them a chance to graduate up to an operator 2 level, or a path towards a 90-day review. And if they've picked up the skills that you were hoping to within 90 days, they may be, adjusted compensation wise to reflect that. So that'd be one little thing that we do that recognizes a little bit of that.
So I know in our prior discussion, there was quite a bit of chatter about recognition in front of others, and that people like to feel appreciated among their peers. Do you specifically put programs in place to do that? Do you encourage them to compete with one another where, there's always a winner and a loser? How do you manage that? It seems like yet another program that we're adding to try and stabilize the labor market. Debbie, how about you?
We found that sometimes people don't like to be the center of attention. So we're doing more things in group activities or smaller events. So the focus isn't definitely on one person, but maybe a small team or a department. That seems to be working well for us. But there's a lot of people that don't like to be in the limelight, but yet, it's really important that they do get recognized, and feel appreciated.
Trey, Buren, how about you?
We do a couple different things. We've got in our kind of HR accounting department, we've got a box of gift cards. And so when stuff that happens, like someone catches a misprint, or someone catches something, or someone just did something good for another person, our managers will tell that person, tell the other person that they helped out to run upstairs and grab a gift card, and then personally hand it over to them and just say, hey, thank you, I got something for you. So they're not actually out any money for it, but it goes a long ways that someone did that. And it may be a $10 gift card to Taco Bell or kind of something else, but it goes a long ways there. And then we try praising. One thing that we're really kind of working on here is how do I get, it's really for the managers to, in a company meeting to go out and say, Jerry did a great job doing this and Joey did a great job doing this. But one thing I wanted to kind of develop, how do we get more just like it says, that recognition from the peers? Because sometimes it means a lot more coming from, your press helper saying, hey, he's really taking the time to really help me out. And I really appreciate Sam for doing this for me. And then my goal is maybe that may be contagious, where everybody just wants to share some love for their people right next to them and really create some bonds as well. I just think that'll go a lot further than just coming from the manager. So, I think it goes a long ways in showing that.
I'd like to add the peer-to-peer recognition seems to go really well here at John Roberts as well. People like hearing from their peers, and we've developed a thank you card program. And so they can thank each other, and they save those thank you cards and they can turn them in for gift cards and things like that. So it is nice. They like to hear from their peers. So peer-to-peer is really just as important as a manager recognizing the employee.
Yeah, you guys have said great things. The only thing so we do monthly employee recognition meetings to sing happy birthday, celebrate anniversaries for the people that like Debbie said, not everybody wants to get in front, so people can scrub their birthday from the list if they want to. But that's also, an area where we can do some individual recognition or departmental recognitions. But probably the one of the most valuable parts about that is, we get to kind of share big picture how the company is doing and kind of progress towards our milestones. And it's been, helping employees feel connected to the overall vision and direction of the company has been super valuable. Although it's really good when things are going well and you can kind of give people kudos for being a huge part of that. And as I'm sure anybody on this call knows, things aren't always going well. And sometimes things are going bad, even though people are doing really good work and working really hard. So then it kind of becomes this tough, but for sure, when things are going well, sharing that, letting everybody kind of feel the momentum and feel connected to the outcome has been rewarding, and I think caused people to feel like they understand what they're a part of and they understand how what they're doing is helping move the ship forward, so to speak.
Excellent. There's a question from our attendees. Anyone working on knowledge transfer practices to more quickly train up a replacement employee for those that might be leaving? How do you get that knowledge transfer done quickly before you lose the person who has that knowledge?
I think it's by not waiting. I think it's going and doing it beforehand. So we do one thing, just constant cross training and constantly doing that throughout whatever position it might be, whether it's in bindery or on the press, things like that. And when we first started doing a lot of cross training, the first fear is, all right, I'm training somebody to take my job, or and it gets in their head. So we had to really kind of reverse that culture of letting everybody know, like, hey, this is here, so you can actually maybe take some little bit more time off, and we're going to teach you on another machine too, and everybody, and then they want to really help out. And that's really kind of helped even from when we bring in new talent and bringing in some, like our pressman's probably average age is probably late 30s. So we've got a lot of young guys doing that, and a lot of the older guys took them underneath their wing, and then we go back to them and like really kind of, and that's where the managers come in of having those conversations, like, hey, look at that guy's smile on his face. He's like, you helped him get where he's at, and they feel a little bit more sense of pride. So I think it's doing that cross training. Same in the sales department as well. Even our CSRs, bringing our CSRs in on certain sales conversations and specific ones that, because we've got one guy right now that's going to probably start transitioning into sales because he's been able to bring in, and we've been kind of teaching him how the sales process works as well. And so he's kind of blossomed into something we weren't expecting. And now we kind of bring him in to the sales process. So I think it's you got to constantly be training and sharing that knowledge.
What about formalized training? You guys are career counselors now, and on-the-job training happens day to day, but what about formal training? Do any of you have a program that you use, and if so, how's it working?
We don't have any formal, most of our training is on the job, kind of manager training, no formal program.
We're the same. We used to have one for sales, but it's kind of more, let's just roll up our sleeves and kind of learn and be on the spot, because you'll learn a lot more. You learn through mistakes, you learn as projects go by, and we're just moving so fast.
We have a training program through our ISO program, where there's steps that they have to complete, and there's 3 stages for each position. But a little bit on individuals that have that knowledge base. I love working with individuals that have a couple years left to work. And we have a lot of employees here at John Roberts that have dedicated their whole career here. And not only will we be losing their expertise, but I also think of them when they leave and when they walk out this door, and what an impact that is going to be on their lives, from going to their job every day to not going. So 2 to 3 years before they start retiring, I start working with these individuals. And I even like going down to more of a part-time basis with them towards the end of their career. So it's not such a shock when they leave. So that's when I'm gathering a lot of that data and having them share with new people or different people taking over their role.
So more of a
mean, I would-
mentorship?
Oh,
Go ahead, Bjorn.
I was just gonna add, I mean, because you mentioned going down to part-time as a way for, it to kind of be a step down is good we've done that as well. And it's been good both for the employees, but also kind of on the overlap side. So bringing in replacements and rather than having 2 FTEs, now we just have 1.5 FTEs, and kind of helps with the, expands your ability to, train over a longer period of time. So it's been good kind of on both sides as an incremental step down, but also gives us more overlap time. And so that was a good idea by you.
Excellent. That next bullet is a tough one, being transparent. Society today expects it. Certainly, it is a good thing to share, but sometimes we've had members say it gets them in trouble. We sold this big job and look at what you're producing. And then people start to say, where's my piece of the pie? Or if we're doing so well, how come I'm not making more money? How do you handle it?
That's a tough one. I think it is. We want to be as transparent as possible, and we're probably very open with everybody. And that's just kind of our mentality and what we want to do. And you've got to work on, especially like I've learned when you're working on new projects, things like that, there's certain people that can take it with a grain of salt, and there's certain people that can't take it. Like if you start working on a new project and go, 50-60% of the way and decide that that's just not the best direction, and then you just cancel it. There's some people that's hard for them to handle that, but then some other people are not. So it's knowing what to share and what not to share. I think you made a good point on, we've seen that a lot. We've had a lot of growth, and we're celebrating a new milestone, month after month, and everybody else is seeing that. And we get a lot of that. So it's more of communicating too of, I think it's not only saying, all right, hey, we're killing it in sales, we're killing it in printing, we're making all this money, but it's also even communicating. It's like, all right, hey, we're reinvesting back in the company. We're reinvesting in buying new equipment so that you guys can make your lives easier. We're reinvesting in growing, adding more positions. We're reinvesting in even adding more foot space so we can have more jobs and do like that. And that costs money as well. And even understanding that, hey, we're on a really good wave right now, and that could end. So we got to be cautious of that. So that way we're not only, it's really easy for them to say, hey, how much more money can I make? But it's also like, hey, let's preserve jobs in the future as well. So I think it's also just great to talk about the good things, but also talking about all the things that we're doing to set up for the future and for our growth over the next 5 to 10 years or plus.
That's a really good point. Some companies will put a growth chart on the wall. They want people to be proud that the company is growing, but sometimes economic impacts, like what Rick and Joe talked about, can cause you to have a setback, and then that feels negative, and then people start to jump ship because they feel like, oh, it's not growing anymore. So it's a very slippery slope. Do you put those charts on the wall? Bjorn, how open are you with what's going on?
I would say we're pretty open, and that's part of, it's not the same level of openness with every level of, executive management, staff, but overall we're pretty open, but more directionally open. In terms of kind of the whole company, we're more directionally open. One of the things that we talk about quite a bit is we operate fiscally conservative. So, we're slow to hire, and we do that so that we can be slow to fire. Because, in our industry, there's a lot of peaks and valleys, and so I think we do our best to be open and have everybody understand kind of the general position that we're in without, like Trey mentioned, sharing something that can be taken out of context, or sharing something that, the wrong conclusion can be drawn. But we do. So I guess our level of openness is we do, part of our employee recognition meetings every month is an update on how the company did financially the previous month. So there's a general idea of, hey, did we do well? Did we have a tough month, or what were things like?
Mhm. So we talked a little bit about that catch-up impact on wages. Do you still provide a cost of living increase as well as performance increase as well as a bonus? How do you split it up?
I think for us, we've kind of combined it to a certain degree. And maybe their increase is a tad more because of the cost of living, but really don't talk about it as a cost of living, because that could get really dangerous. And then you're really doing a cost of living for everyone. So, and it really we have to look at the position and the performance and where the employee's at. So I think our cost of living is probably maybe inside of that increase for their performance without maybe saying the cost of living word.
Mhm.
We same for us. So we, our kind of general increases to hourly or salary, we don't specify cost of living or whatever. So that would be, kind of a more big picture, along with, like we did a increase to our 401k match program, so kind of thinking of that general compensation package. But then we have the profit sharing on top, which is more contingent on company performance, growth individually, as the company gets bigger and does better, presumably that should be creating, career advancement opportunities where somebody could be advancing further than just the standard increase that we might budget for the company. So yeah, we don't specifically reference cost of living, and there'd kind of be a combination of recognizing a general increase across the company, but then, more variable increases based on individual role and company performance.
I see. We have a question from the group, and it is, how are your companies viewing or handling transparency with wage information as it's been reported in the news recently? So, we have news channels that are talking about the hourly wage, and then your company has to take a stance or handle it. And I think that's really a question for the whole group. Rick, you're seeing it with lots of different companies. What's your response?
Yeah, I don't know, to some of the things that the panel has said too, you got to try to do the best you can, because there's going to be no easy answer to that when you're particularly comparing yourself to other opportunities. The grass is greener, and so you got to, all these things that we've been talking about, culture and transparency and just communication and efforts to make the folks that are there feel like they want to stay there. I think that's your best defense on this, because if you sit there and try to play dollar for dollar against news reports, I think you lose the battle. I don't know what the others might have to say about that, but I just think you should stay the course on the things that we've been talking about here, and you will not have to be dealing with that issue as much, I think.
Teresa, I'd like to interject on that. I really echo what Rick is saying. There's so much news out there, and for example, here in California, there's going to be transparency, and whenever you hire someone, you are required now, will be next year, to post a range of compensation, which is done in other areas, other cities, and what have you. But it's becoming more of a mandate for that transparency. But as a guy who lived through the industry in the 80s and the hyperinflation, which this inflation is nothing compared to what we saw in those days, you stayed true to course. There's always someone out there paying more money. Someone out there is always going to be moving. But if people want to work for you and you're paying them fairly and treating them fairly, it's going to work. But it takes a lot of effort. But I think, as our panelists have talked about, all those issues are critical, and kudos to them. Kudos to them.
I'd like to add, I think the wages are extremely important to our employees, but I think as leaders, we have to look at what else we are providing. It's that work environment. It's who you're working with, who you're working for, how the benefits have a huge role. So it's not always about the wages. And I think as leaders, we need to really emphasize that to our employees.
I think so. I think you look at it because you'll hear a lot of people come in, it's like, well, I can go make $20 washing dishes at McDonald's. Perfect. Go wash dishes at McDonald's and make $20. If that's what you want to do, go do it. And because people think they can kind of take you hostage and force your hand, but I think it's too, and even the people that are more apt to think that way, and versus like, hey, I want to be a part of this team, that's probably not the people you want anyways.
Right.
I mean, I want somebody on here that says, hey, I see the future for me here, and I want to do everything I can. And then it's looking at, okay, I want to reward this person and get them where they need to be as well. So.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd add is I do think it's probably wise to have your pay ranges make sense. You don't want to be in that conversation and have egg on your face where somebody is correctly underpaid, and that's been a little bit difficult, especially over the last 12 months where it's felt like sometimes we've been just desperate for bodies and we have to pay what it takes to bring, so how do you balance that with, respecting the ranges that you're already paying? So I think working towards having, a thing we're working towards having kind of defined ranges by job description has been helpful, and then feeling some level of conviction on, I think we're relatively confident that we're paying a fair market, rate for the roles. It just protects you in a conversation like that, or at least gives you a little bit more ground to stand on, where if everything's kittywampus and out of whack, then some of those conversations can be understandably awkward.
Certainly, I say participation in the wage and benefit survey helps all of us, because having that data helps you to have confidence that what you're paying is accurate, that it's fair, that it's reasonable. So this last bullet before we move on is the exit interview. Is there any particular question, exit interview question or exit interview answer, where you have gathered the most relevant data?
I think exit interviews are great. I think you can learn things from there. You usually kind of already know whether if they're gonna put something down. You're probably already feeling it, or you already kind of know it up front. But it's also kind of just good to know. You just never know what they might say. And a lot of times we may see a lot of praises in there as well. Like, I enjoyed working here, just had a better opportunity. So. And that goes back, if you get some praises, it's great to take that back to the managers that you're working on, trying to get them to buy into that vision and say, hey, even though they left, they loved working for you. They just had a better opportunity and stuff. So keep on doing what you're doing. And they kind of gives them a sense of pride.
I think exit interviews can be a useful tool, but it's too late. And so we've been doing more state interviews. And so meeting with employees on a regular basis during their course of employment, finding out what's working, what's not. Hopefully at that point, I can maybe correct, or we can correct maybe something that might not be going well before the employee decides to make that decision to leave the company.
Yes, stay interviews are great. That's a great idea that we probably don't do enough of. On the exit interview side, I feel like we do it more informally and ask more open-ended questions. But one of the questions that we always, our employees are our number one value. And, so wanting to get an idea of, did you feel valued at Impact? Did you feel valued by your manager? Did you feel valued by, owners or by your employees, and just seeing where that conversation leads in. And obviously, like Trey mentioned, you got to take it with a grain of salt, and some people might be leaving with an axe to grind, and some people might be leaving on great terms, but it's just an opportunity for us to evaluate, hey, are we living up to the values and kind of the picture that we're aiming for, type of deal.
Great information. This last slide is really talking about having a plan, that some days are challenging and others are triumphs. And, Trey, I think it was you that shared that you have to put a plan in place to get to where your vision is. And that doesn't just happen overnight. Will you share your experience?
So probably about 10 years ago when we rebranded and changed our whole mind thought of like how we're even approaching our sales, how we're even working with our customers and stuff like that, and just did a complete 180 on it. And like I said, change is hard. And so when we implemented that, we sat down and intentionally discuss what does that look like? And like, what is that if we were standing here now in 10 years, what were we looking back and said, what have we accomplished? And so we intentionally sat down, we intentionally set together like over my shoulder, core values. We've never had core values before. So we went through that, and that wasn't something we just whipped out on a piece of paper really quick. That was something we brought in the managers and brought everybody in and had them kind of discuss. And there was a lot of discussion back and forth, and we hit those over and over and over. And the first 3 to 5 years, honestly, were a struggle, just getting everybody that mindset from a production standpoint, from a sales standpoint. And, we had we go 1 or 2 feet forwards, but then we sometimes go 3 feet back. Sometimes we go a little bit further. So I guess you got on here, stay the course, but we truly believe that was it, and we protected our culture and did everything we could. And we're expecting it to be 10 years, but probably about the 8th year is like I felt like everything's clicking. We've got a sales team that everybody understands what we're wanting to accomplish. They're all pushing forwards. We had a lot more growth there. Our production staff was bringing new ideas to our sales team. They were excited, and just everything there that we struggled through, that you had days of like, is it even worth it, to where you're like, you look back and says, wow, I'm glad we did this. And it's also looking back, it's like, if we wanted to have taken that leap of faith, if we wanted to have done that 8-10 years ago, then we'd be right here doing the same exact thing, struggling and just barely making it through the day and being frustrated and not have a good culture, not have a place where people want to be at. And so it's good. So sometimes it's just saying, hey, let's just start today. It's going to be rough, but let's get going. Let's put together a plan. Let's sit down and be intentional on it, and then do everything you can to start walking that way.
Excellent. Comments from the others?
We did a similar, so 5 years ago, we implemented EOS. Traction is a book, and it teaches an operating system called EOS, which does a lot of the same things, that Trey mentioned. It helps you kind of formulate your company vision, your 1-year target, your 3-year, 5-year, what are your core values, what's your defendable niche. And so that's helped, and that's something that then is communicated across the whole organization. So the whole kind of purpose is, hey, what are we aiming for? And then let's make sure that everybody understands what we're aiming for. Both from a standpoint of, one of the parts is what's our niche. Obviously there's like a market niche, why are our customers working with us? But being kind of in the finance and HR side, and kind of relevant to this conversation, figuring out what our niche is in terms of why our employees are with us, or why somebody would come and work with us has been super important. And that's where, Debbie mentioned stay interviews. That would be a great way of figuring out, hey, what is it? You've been here 20 years. Why haven't you, what have you liked about it? What keeps you here? And my guess is all of our organizations, there's probably some things that we all need to do. We all need to be at a certain level in certain areas. But aside from that, we probably all have a unique area. The way our employees would answer that would probably be unique to each of our companies. And then once we understand that, then we can kind of lean into that, focus on that, and use that as a selling point to bring in, to keep our good employees and bring in new ones too.
I think having a plan is something that every company needs to have. It should be an automatic. I love the idea of all the different divisions, whether it's finance, sales, HR, operations, all coming together with their plan or their vision of where they want to go, and then merging that into one plan, and then being able to share that with our employees. Plans change, and just like our own personal lives, that things change And we get to a certain point and we regroup and we go forward again. But I think having a plan, I think everybody should have a plan.
And I want to add one more thing. We've been talking about, just our internal culture, but from a sales standpoint, I mean, that's what we're in here for, is for our customers and everything. But our customers and I mean, think about the brands that you associate yourself, from clothing to where you eat, things like that. Is whenever you have a great culture, our customers see that and they're watching all the time, and they want to be a part of that. And so that brings in more customer loyalty, and they thrive on it, and they see that, hey, you're taking care of your customers, and that's somebody that I want to associate my business with. So from a sales standpoint, that's a great selling point on there as well, and it's just the right thing to do.
Excellent. Excellent. Great information. Well, we are just at the top of the hour. Certainly, the discussion started with these reports, the wage and benefit study and the sales compensation report. And so the question is, how do I get those? You can contact your America's Print Association network by going to the printindustries.org website. There is a Connect Locally drop down where you'll find that partner search so that you can find them, or you can fill out a form on that site, printindustries.org, to request the wage and benefit survey or the sales compensation survey. With that said, any last comments from the group to inspire those that are still on the call? You still have 50 people that are listening to the presentation today. Very inspirational. Go ahead.
I think the main thing is we can get stuck in our own way. And again, it's sometimes you just gotta, and it seems daunting, whatever you're doing, but I'm starting to see, we started this and we've been doing, our culture has been in a great spot for a long time. And I'm starting to see a lot of other print companies around the US starting to add in more benefits and different stuff around for their employees and stuff. And it's been neat seeing that growth. And so I think if you're worried about it, I say just start today. And it doesn't have to be a lot. It can be something little. I mean, we spend a lot with Uline for different stuff and packaging and things like that. So they send us free stuff. So when that closet fills up a bunch of Uline stuff, we'll go bring everybody together and do a paper, rock, scissor challenge or a paper airplane challenge. So there's little things that you can do. It doesn't have to be, all right, we're going to spend all this extra money. There's little things that just be organic, and those end up being the best. So it's well worth it, and it'll make your life a lot easier and a lot more enjoyable. You'll enjoy going to work.
Excellent. Great comments. Thank you. Thank you all for taking the time to prepare this and for taking the time to present. It sounds like the ideas that you have that are working at your companies can be taken to other companies to spread the word and lift up our entire industry to move it forward. So thank you for attending today as well. It's being recorded. Those that attended will get email with a link to the recording, as well as a PDF of the slides, and you can reach out and ask questions if you have them. Any last comments before we conclude the program?
Great job, Teresa and the panel. Terrific information. Thank you so much for all your support in putting it together.
And thank you for hosting. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thanks all.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.